everyone, and welcome to another RU15 Voice of Literacy interview. This week, I am excited that we're going to get to talk to my friend and hero, Ms. Kristen Ziemke. Kristen, welcome to our
Thank
course.
you.
Yay! Apart from sharing the fact that I'm such a great admirer of Kristen's, and I feel like we have been friends for a very long time, I want to give her an opportunity to introduce herself and her background to all of you. So, Kristen, will you just tell our students a little bit about yourself?
Sure. Hi, everybody. I'm so excited to be with you tonight. I'm Kristen, and I live and teach in Chicago. I started my early career in early childhood education, and then was lucky enough to be part of Apple's first grant program for iPads. So I started working with iPads in 2011 with first grade students. And then from that point in time, I just got so curious and excited about it. I started to do more work in that area. And now I work with pre-K through 12th grade in Chicago on a variety of technology pieces supporting students, teachers, teacher librarians, and administrators as well. So it's really interesting, like, to think about it across all ages and across the curriculum and see what commonalities we can find for people to fuel curiosity, build thinking, and just get students to a point where they love learning and never want to stop.
I love that so much. This semester, each week, we've spent time exploring different ways that we can leverage technology to make a more meaningful learning experience for students or patrons, for learners of all ages, and in a library setting. And now that we're reaching the end of the semester, uh, what I wanted to talk to you a little bit about was sort of the both sides of that coin. First of all, just sort of what you see as kind of the big picture moral imperatives around making sure that all kids, but particularly marginalized learners or vulnerable learners, why making sure that they understand how to use these tools to harness their own curiosity and be a part of our citizenry, why that's so important. I think maybe we could start there.
Yeah, I think for me, it goes back to like curiosity. And so much of the research on curiosity coming out across the last 10 years shows something like kindergartners ask 70 questions per hour, um, just, going through their school day with each other, with adults in their life. By the time we get to fifth grade, kids ask -1 question,
Mm.
so just a few questions a day. And by the time they get to high school, many times kids are just asking questions so that they get their participation points. And so I see technology in a library setting as a way to bring curiosity back. And curiosity, of course, leads to collaboration and communication and critical thinking. And it sort of shifts interaction from like school settings being about what the teacher's questions are or the librarian's questions are to like really valuing kids' questions and showing them that, like, if you have a question, we have all these resources that you can access to find out more. And I think like that's a goal for me, that kids get in a habit of seeking more information, not so much finding the answers to things, because I think the answer oftentimes signals the end, right? Like, oh, I found the answer, it's over. But truly curious, thoughtful people keep seeking, and even if you know so much about, volcanoes, you can keep learning more because there's always new information that's changing and coming out about.
Do you have any examples of that you might share, either from your own practice or that you've seen around the world?
Examples of kids following paths of curiosity.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. I have so many examples of that where students like just keep asking and go down this curiosity spiral, where they're actually reaching out to experts and having Skype calls or asking a student abroad. Years ago, we really early on started blogging. in first grade. And so kids just realized that they could ask peers around the country to help them
Mhm.
find more information. So we used to have an anchor chart in class. It was like, where can you go to find more information? You can go to the library, you can read a book, you can ask the principal, you can post a question to your blog and like see what your audience, and not just an audience of kids, but like families and grandparents that were also following blogs. I think we've also found a really easy way to leverage Twitter for
Yeah.
libraries and students, and just showing like you can find someone who knows about this, ask your question, and ask for them to give you feedback, and so when we see that we really do have networks at any
Yeah.
age that we can access, it's so exciting to do that
Well,
sort of.
this semester, my students have been exploring the project of creating their own PLN. For many of the students watching this, that's been a first time journey this semester. And oh my gosh, wouldn't you give anything to go back and do that again, Kristen?
Oh
Like,
my
it's
gosh, it's
just
so
so
joyful.
exciting. Yeah, it's so exciting for me to watch these practitioners become connected educators and all the benefits and magic that that brings to your life, right?
It
But
totally changed my life.
yeah, me too. And I think once you start seeing how that learning can affect you as a practitioner, you very naturally want to share that with learners. Like you want them to have that same experience. But I think sometimes educators see the age requirements of Twitter or the digital safety aspect as it being a barrier. How do you overcome that? Like, what are just practical ways that you connect kids without having to hand them the keyboard?
Absolutely. I think that like what we do is we just have a classroom Twitter account supervised by the teacher, right?
Mhm.
So kids, especially in elementary age, they're not old enough, but we have like a Room 106 Twitter, or you might have a Hawthorne Library Twitter,
Mhm.
something along those lines, where kids can be invited to guest post. And the rule for us is always before you press tweet or send, right? Like you either have to have another student or the teacher approve it.
Right.
We've also just invited students to post their questions to simple things like Seesaw, a Google Doc, and then I just copy and paste their words.
Mhm.
We always only use initials when
Yeah.
we're posting and sharing on Twitter. And so kids have gotten the habit of doing that. Many times we have a class archiver, and it's a team of two students. And as we're going through our learning day, they're just sitting and taking notes and very inventive spelling about what's going on. And then later we post all those for our families that are watching, and so people can see. So either having them write it someplace first, or just having a system where I'm going to read all these before you post, or there's going to be like a tag team where you're both reading and responsible.
I love that. Well, I'll never forget years ago, I was in a library where the librarian had her library Twitter up on the projector. And just in the exact same way you're talking about, they had posed some questions related to a book that they were reading the previous week. This is an elementary school library, so the kids were on a fixed schedule. So the previous week, they'd post some questions to Twitter, and now they were looking at some of the responses. And I'll never forget these second graders when they realized that one of the responses they received was from the author of the book. And you would have thought like Elvis had walked into the room. Of course, they didn't know who Elvis was, but you know what I mean.
Yeah.
And but the really magical part then was that this librarian said, "Now wait a second, how can we be sure this is really the author? Let's click on this." And of course, she had looked at all this
Yes.
before, so she, for the kids, it was happening in real time, but of course she double checked to make sure it was the real author. And what does that blue check mark mean, and all of that stuff? And what a rich conversation to have with kids. And none of them are touching a device. They're just, before
Yeah.
they're even old enough, exploring those ideas.
And I think like upwards of 80% of our instruction with tech happens with one teacher device and a projector, and it's the idea of a think aloud during a read aloud that we're
Right.
just doing with tech now. So now I'm going to go and press this. What does this tell me? How do I do this? Like all of
Yeah.
those little things. So we don't have to be afraid that like everybody's doing something. Like in my classroom, we have 30 plus students, and like not every iPad is on Twitter at once. There's two,
Mhm.
it would be like four kids. And so I can supervise that. Or we go through and read our tweets when they're on the projector, right? Like, so
Mhm.
I'm going through, we're reading them. And it's just such a powerful piece. And I think authors, from my experience, authors have been so willing to interact and engage with
Yeah.
kids on Twitter. And um, at first my students were so excited, just like you shared about those second graders, like
Mhm.
connecting with the author. But then they start having relationships with these authors through social media. And it just is like, we were sitting in class one day, and one of my students like looked wistfully at the sky and was like, I wonder what Seymour's doing. And I was like, Seymour? I was like, Seymour who? And they're like, Simon, Seymour from Twitter. They're like, I wonder what he's doing right now. And I was like, well, why don't you go tweet him and like ask him what he's doing right now?
Sure.
And so he and his buddy just started this whole back and forth. And then it eventually got to, we think you should write books about, and like a whole list. Like Seymour Simon needs some recommendations,
Right.
all time. But they just listed all these things that they wanted him to write about. And of course, Seymour, being just such an amazing human, like writes back and gets back to them within the hour, So like that's,
Oh,
it's just so beautiful.
I love it. That's so
How
awesome.
they think, like it changes
Right.
them.
It really does. That reminds me, I want to talk, I want to share this story. I just thought of it because it's just so cute to me. And it's not a Twitter story, but it's sort of a branch from the same tree of what you're talking about. In my old school district, there was a teacher who used to have a 24-hour Skype-a-thon once a year. And so she would, over the course of 24 hours, with the help of lots of parents and librarians and all the teachers in the building, et cetera, have kids rotate through her room in order to chat with someone from every time zone around the world over a course of 24 hours. Yeah, it
That's
was a cool experience for kids. But my favorite, very favorite story from that entire experience is at one point they were Skyping with kids, and I don't remember the country, but one of the things they were sharing is that their class, the class there in North Carolina, had a guinea pig as a class pet. And in whatever country they were Skyping with, the kids said, "Oh, we eat guinea pigs." And our kids were horrified, right? Like they were horrified. But it led to this entire inquiry that lasted the whole year about like how animals are viewed differently around the world, and what do we, if we're really worried about our pet being safe from these people who might eat them, like how do we keep our pet healthy? And everything that they read about the entire year, she would hook them in by saying, now, could our guinea pig live here at this time? And, all this
Yes,
stuff, the guinea pig became the point of entry for everything they did,
it's so
all based
awesome.
on this connection. Yes. Yeah. I loved it. You could have heard a pin drop in that room when the one kid was like, oh, we eat guinea pigs.
Yes, and like I'm sure people cried, and it was just dramatic. No, I, and those things permeate their existence.
Yes.
They go back and remember those things. Also, like an unanticipated outcome for me, doing more things online with kids, was that families were so much more involved.
Hmm.
Because like that's where families are too, right? And so
Right.
we would talk about who our mystery reader was, or like who we interacted with. Families always wanted to share something and interact and bring those current event or cultural pieces together, with our students, which was just really lovely. The number of people we got to talk to around the world just made our understanding of each other so much more refined.
Yeah, that's interesting. That leads me to another question then. Sometimes I think families have concerns about the amount of screen time that their kids get, or about being connected to people in other places. And I wonder about the conversations that you have with families about those things, and how do you all come to an understanding about what the benefits versus the risks are?
Yeah, we have a lot of conversations about it. And, parents have to, either attend like a video webinar or a face-to-face meeting on like how we're going to do this, and then sign off. And as a district-wide policy, we have a sign off, just your kids can be online, their work can be online, or their face or likeness can be online.
Mhm.
And every single year, I have a couple of families that don't sign at first, which is totally fine, right? Like there are lots of workarounds we can use for that. But then by parent teacher conferences in November, every one of those families, knock on wood, has changed their mind because they're
Mhm.
really just looking that you're taking care of their child. And once they see the types of things that we're sharing, how kids are interacting, the feedback that we're getting, they want a really high quality experience for their child too. And so many times it's just that building trust and rapport with
Right.
them.
I love that. So, and recently there's been a lot of discussion about screen time
Oh,
specifically. And I just wondered, have you had any conversations about that, either with families or other teachers who are concerned about that? And just
yeah.
what your response is?
Yeah, actually, this is something that, has been talked about for years, and there are a
Hmm.
lot of studies that are constantly addressing this. Um, In 2016, the American Academy of Pediatrics updated their screen time guidelines. And what they found, and it was based in science, was that there's really no such thing as screen time anymore because it's ubiquitous in what we're doing. And that it's not so much about the minutes, it's about the quality and intentionality of what kids are doing on screens. And so basically coming back down to, is it something that is passive or is it something that is active? And so the narrative at that time was just around high quality. What are they doing? Is their thinking present? This has been revisited so many times. New studies come out and say, the biggest thing about screen time is what you're doing on screens. And so, we continue to look for this to be updated, but I really think it's about what we're doing. And that even goes for programs in schools. There
Hmm.
are assessment programs that are not high quality, and kids are spending a lot of screen time with those tools. And so, whereas I'm all for knowing kids better, I do think, like as a society, we really have to look at what is the engagement factor and the quality of what we're asking
Right.
kids to do online.
I think a lot about that in terms of equity and about the ways in which, and we've in this course, we've had this conversation several times throughout the course, but the data we do have about how tech is often distributed in an inequitable way, in which we have a lot of kids who come in and are given the tech simply for remedial assessment work, like you're talking about, and then other kids being given the opportunity to create and to explore curiosities and to connect and collaborate using technology, and how those two opportunities are not always given to kids in an equitable way. And so, I guess I'm leading to a question here at some point. I guess what I would say is, how do you help teachers understand that uh, all kids need the opportunity to use the technology for those creative, more rich pursuits, when teachers feel so pressured by the assessment and remediation, aspect of it, which we could have a whole other conversation about.
Yeah. And I think like this is a conversation that goes back so far before tech as well.
Hmm.
Like my mentor, Steph Harvey, always talks about kids who need the best instruction also get the worst instruction because they're constantly in remediation, like you said, or being pulled out for title, reading specialists, additional support. And every child should like be in the classroom with a robust learning condition where it's thoughtful and creative and we're making connections and we're practicing to build fluency. um, I think the pressure is been very sincere over the last couple of years, but I'm feeling like I'm starting to see that pendulum shift back
Hope
where
so.
people I know where people are asking like what have we done to kids? Like is this the best way? Test scores are still the same, like what are we doing? And I think like part of that we can see in the outreach for social emotional learning right now. Like we've realized we haven't taught that for a decade, 2 decades, possibly, right? We focused on core academic subjects and haven't taught to the whole child. And now we're really seeing the repercussions of that and the need and the desire to teach those things once again. Um, and so, as we look at those testing pressures and really think about what kids need, I'm hoping that those drop a little bit. I also think this is time for like brave leadership, whether it be from principals or government officials, really looking at these items and saying, are these tests the end all be all, right?
Hmm.
Is this applicable to real life learning? Are these expectations reasonable? Are these going to really indicate long-term academic success for kids of all ages? And I think a bunch of the new research on EQ, right?
Hmm.
Like your emotional intelligence is showing like that could very much be the most important thing. And so I'm hoping all these forces coming together will ease some of that right now. But it is very hard. And um, I'm in schools where there is that pressure all the
Yeah.
time. And it is the kids that need the best instruction. And so trying to find that line can be difficult at times.
So that leads me, I'm going to ask you two more questions and I'm going to let you go. But so
Sure.
that you talked about brave leadership, and I love that phrase. I'm going to use it a lot. So get ready to be plagiarized. But I think that librarians, whether we're talking about a school librarian or a public librarian, that they have the opportunity and obligation to be brave leaders in that way because they're not beholden to those tests in the exact same way that a classroom teacher is. The instructional time that a librarian has with learners, they have an opportunity to balance some of
Yep.
the instructional practices in the classroom that are assessment driven rather than kid driven. And
Mhm.
so my question about that is sometimes librarians find that they get pushback from their principals, from teachers, and in the public library or academic library setting from families who have who have either because of pressure or because of what they've been told, worry that time not spent uh, practicing those assessment skills is not time well spent. So, how what advice would you give to librarians who have to defend those kinds of practices? Like how to a teacher, how would you help a teacher understand?
hmm I think being informed about standards and data is oftentimes the best things we can do. And that's some of the work that Katie and I have tried to do with our writing is to give people here's what research says now, because I think we carry a lot of old narratives about some of those things. But I also think like the best way to defend the work that you're doing with kids is naming some of those standard pieces and saying, well, actually, Common Core anchor standards that kids can find key details and the main idea in a piece of text or digital media, right? And so
Mm-hmm.
we're practicing that digital media piece or just naming some of those things that are those big overarching standards in whatever practice we do. I think a lot of times is like supporting people to find ways where they could also use it in their classroom is a nice workaround. We're
Mm-hmm.
saying, let me come in your room and show you how this does connect back to what you're doing with test preparation or some of the quarterly goals that you might have. But I also think it's a real opportunity just to pull out and ask to do a PD for your staff on
Mm-hmm.
libraries today, right? Because I think so much of it can be that we all experience library situations. Mine were very good, other people's might not have been, but it does inform what I think about libraries. People who haven't had those same experiences might not understand what libraries can look like today. So I think doing a PD, I think sharing your work widely, whether it be on social media or create a library website for your library where you're just talking about different things that you're doing, book talks, balancing like text sets, like physical books, with multimedia websites and resources, and sharing that with the teacher, saying, oh, you guys are studying the Constitution right now. Well, here's a digital and print set of resources that I thought might be able to help, and sort of showing them that you can teach all these things, but you can do it in a different way too. I also think like giving kids opportunities and then positioning kids in front of teachers, leaders, administration, boards, whoever, to show what they're doing is the most powerful piece, because when kids can articulate what they're doing and why and how that impacts their learning, people really do stop and listen to that.
I agree. Sometimes they can send the message a lot better than the adults can.
I was like, go talk to Hannah, see what she's doing, like all of those sorts of things. But I also wrote down this equity piece because you asked that at the very beginning, and I didn't get a chance to
Oh, yeah,
address
go ahead.
that. Um, so one of the things I think we also need to be really mindful of is like what we're modeling with technology and kids. Common Sense has a new tween and teen study on how they're using their devices and media. And what we know is that the numbers have just increased so significantly. Um, 30%, I think, of third graders have their own personal device, something crazy like that. But what it finds for kids in low income settings is that they have significantly more screen time than their higher income peers, both as tweens and as teens. And it varies by like over an hour, hour 20 plus of screen time per day. So I think that's something to notice and note. For me, as a digital educator, that speaks to me that kids don't either know where to go to find the information that they need, or they're just, sort of doing that passive stuff on a device, right? Which increases time, and they don't have maybe the same parent supervision or access to books that they could be reading. So really help thinking about where can we send kids to find great resources so that if they are having extended screen time, it's quality screen time. The other thing that the study found was that students in low income homes frequently are doing their work and their research on a cell phone as opposed to a computer or an iPad, right? Like cell phones are accessible to families. You might not have the additional income to have like multiple devices. And so that made me really think about like how many times are we modeling on phones? Like how many times are we setting kids to like access their Google, set a calendar alert, go to a resource that's mobile based. And because the layout of that is so different, the way to access the information is so different. And so I'm thinking a lot like Anne Magnan out of Norway, her research shows that it varies by format, right? So reading an ebook is different than reading a PDF, is different than reading social media, right? But it also varies by device in terms of reading comprehension. So you read one way on a Chromebook, you read another way on a smartphone. And so just modeling that and giving kids a time to practice doing that is going to be the most important thing. And B, showing them how to use these tools in a way that will allow them to do schoolwork at home, or that they don't have to spend that struggle space figuring it out on their own without guidance. Instead, are paired with like a peer that can support them and go through those pieces.
I'm kind of laughing, chuckling a little bit to myself because my students are, I'm sure, have thought that we have planned this out so that you could reiterate my preaching about mobile devices all throughout the semester. Yes, I know, but I swear Kristen and I did not plot this. So see, yep,
Yeah.
it's not just me who's telling you this. And of course, Darren and I have written a couple of articles for School Library Journal on this very
Yes.
topic. I think that we really do kids a disservice when we tell them to put their phones away, keep them in their lockers, put them in the shoe rack at the front of the classroom or whatever it is, because
Right.
we don't arm them with the tools for information evaluation that they on the devices they really use. And so the skills we teach them in school don't transfer often to when they're actually looking for information. So at that point we take to heart here in this course, I promise you. So
Good. And I
one
think,
last question. Go ahead.
no, I was just going to add on that one thought. I also think when we ask kids to do that, um, that impacts our relationship with readers and with learners.
Yes.
It's a trust thing. Like we don't trust them to make the good
Hmm.
choices about it. And it's also like signals that you're not independent. You might not know. I'm in control, right? It
Hmm.
situates this hierarchy between the adult in the room and the learners in the room. And I think we just got to avoid that altogether.
Yeah, I mean, I don't understand how anyone thinks we can teach kids to make good choices if we don't give them any choices. Like
Right.
they have to make choices and make some bad ones that they can learn from. That's how we learn. Uh,
Absolutely.
so I love that. Well, listen, I wanted to wrap this up by you mentioned Katie, so I want you to be able to say who that is more thoroughly, and I want to give my kids an opportunity to know about your books too. You didn't mention them in when you introduced yourself. Look at I
Right.
just called my students my kids. That's 20 years of public school talking, right? Right
Those
there. My
things.
students who are adults, not children, but my learners. I want them to know about your books because your first book, Amplify, is in like its 412th printing or something like that now, right? It is such a wonderful and groundbreaking book. If you want to talk about that a little bit.
Sure. So, Amplify digital teaching and learning in the K to 6 classroom really just identifies and names some of the practices we should be doing with technology. I think frequently people are like, and then I sprinkle tech at the end because somebody told me I should start using technology. But
Right.
really, what Amplify is about is like, how can we use it well to build comprehension, to fuel readers, to um, increase curiosity in all that we do. And so every chapter ends with 3 things to try tomorrow. Katie and I, as we were early adopters of this with Apple, we would go to meetings or even just conferences and like be the hand raisers that were like, we get
Hmm.
that you can do this with like 15 adults in the room, but what does it look like when there's like 30 people on the rug? Like
Right.
talk me through that or whatever. And so we just wanted to be practical things that like you could read this section tonight and be like, whoa, I'm going to do that tomorrow. And to connect it
Right.
back to some of the comprehension practices that we believe are important. It's not about the tools, it's about the thinking, is what we like to say. And we've heard from a number of educators that are also using this with high school students as well. So I think it does transfer across the grades. Our new book is called Read the World Rethinking Literacy for Empathy and Action in a Digital Age. And this book is kind of our pushback to students being dollar signs in a technological community, right? Like I think we have so many things that like teachers and librarians and administrators feel pressure to get more things and to know more
Mhm.
things and to do more things. And so we really feel like it's time to press pause on all the things, and the ways we should be using technology is first to help learners tell their story, right? It doesn't matter what age you are, but like you have a story and that matters. Through storytelling, you build identity. The second piece would be then to help learners hear the stories of others. And that's where like compassion and empathy and understanding comes in. And we've never been so connected where we can truly hear. So that's a win for students and it's a win for educators as well. And then third, in hearing the stories of others, be inspired to take action. upon some issues. It can start small, it can absolutely start with kids, but we really want to get them in the mindset of like, what could you do to even raise awareness, change a situation, run a campaign for something, and to empower them not just civically, but really as next generation thinkers and problem solvers. And if
Hmm.
we establish that young, we hope that it's something that continues as they move forward.
I love it. And I'm so glad you showed your copy of Read the World with all your little post it notes and stuff in it.
In
Because,
the chat.
Kristen, let me tell you something. Every person I have ever met with copies of your books, and that's been a lot of people, by the way, they pull them out and they all are full of sticky notes, just like that, just including my own. And to me, that is the mark of a book that really empowers teachers to take action. So, I don't try to sell things in this class, but and these are, there's no required text for this course, but I highly recommend your books for my students. I know that they would get a lot out of them. So
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much.
thank
And,
you, my
you know,
friend.
to your students, like, good luck. This is so exciting. You are on the best adventure, and we need you. Like, you truly have the ability to not only change education, but change the world. So I'm so appreciative for the work that you're doing.
Yay. Oh, thank you so much. What a great way to wrap it up. Thank you all, and I will see you next week.